your life changes when you find yourself in a story whose name you don't even remember. The heroine always dreamed of becoming part of some kind of novel in order to be happily married. How did it all come to this, that she ended up in a book, and even as the villain of this world? Let's start the story in order, because it is already known that nothing good awaits this lady according to her plans. The girl became Juliet Orbetian, and she was destined to die early because of her crimes. But the heroine remembered a little of the story's plot, so she wasn't going to make those mistakes. As soon as she found herself in the body of a young aristocrat, Juliet went into hiding in her room. She could not even imagine that soon her quiet, everyday life would be disrupted by the appearance of her fiancé. And not just any ordinary guy, but Caesar Verheim himself, who was a friend of the heroes of the story. Before his unexpected appearance, Orbetian was quietly living her best life, enjoying delicious food. The maids did not particularly bother the lady, who belonged to a rich and famous aristocratic family, so the heroine did whatever she wanted, calmly following the progress of the original plot. Today, according to him, the wedding of the emperor and his childhood friend was supposed to take place. For Juliet, this meant that she was able to survive and avoid the bad fate of being a villain. Of course, the lady was sad about the loss of her world's technology, but at least she could live like this. Orbetian was no longer afraid to go outside the estate, because the worst was behind her. In fact, the heroine was a naturally inquisitive person, so she longed to travel. Of course, Juliet couldn't go anywhere without a pleasant accompaniment in the form of a maid. But now that she was able to live beyond the plot, all this seemed like a trifle to the girl. Juliet didn't expect that her brother named Winslet would suddenly stop her from going. The lady's whole family was looking forward to her marriage, but the miss did not wish for such a fate. Juliet wasn't afraid of the possibility of remaining an old maid, because she liked the freedom of action. Therefore, the lady informed everyone that any candidates from her father were not suitable for her status. After each conversation, the brother became increasingly angry at his sister, who was having a hard time finding a match. Orbetian was looking for a man who would perfectly fulfill the duties of a husband, so the heroine's demands were too high to choose any guy. Winslet saw this perfectly well from the outside, but he loved the lady too much to quarrel with her. The guy couldn't understand why Juliet grew up to be such an unapproachable aristocrat. All the ladies her age were already married, but the girl stubbornly searched for a prince on a white horse. In fact, the heroine didn't need love, because she wanted a fake contract marriage for herself. That is why the heroine's criteria were so high, since she rejected all lovers. While relatives hoped that the lady would marry for love, the girl hoped for calculation. Time passed, but luck did not smile on Juliet, while the pressure from her family grew. Orbetian was so afraid of her own death that she was unwilling to seek love in the characters in the story. But everything changed when one of the most important people in the plot appeared on her doorstep. It so happened that Caesar was looking for a wife, using exactly the same strange and complex criteria. Therefore, the heroine found herself in a situation that she would have preferred to avoid at all costs. But Verheim was determined to marry, even though meeting him could lead to problems. Juliet couldn't ignore the natural charm of the guy who looked like he stepped off the cover of a magazine. Caesar arrived at the Obertian estate with the firm desire to take the marriage contract with him. He had studied all the girls' requirements well, so he was sure that he was ideal for them. The guy was always gentle and docile by nature, so he could become a good husband for anyone. If only this man had not been connected with the emperor, the heroine would have been happier. The current situation was hopeless for Juliet, because she could neither agree nor refuse. The lady's salvation was that Verheim was the first to suggest that they enter into an arranged marriage. The heroine had no idea that there would be a person in this world who would have the same goals. With pain in his eyes, the aristocrat admitted that he would never want to fall in love with anyone else in this life. Only Juliet understood why the guy was behaving in such a strange and incomprehensible way. She remembered well his love story, which was unsuccessful because of his best friend. The heroine spent many nights in tears as she recalled Caesar's pain while reading the book. And now this handsome guy guaranteed that the miss would be able to create a fake marriage with him. For both of them, it was a good opportunity to finally escape the gaze of high society. Juliet experienced firsthand how much pressure there was from her relatives. The only thing that bothered her was the identity of her future husband, because with him, the girl would be drawn into the main plot. But the various advantages quickly outweighed the disadvantages, so Orbetian agreed to the marriage. The guy was visibly pleased that a candidate for the marriage contract was found so easily. These two people were pursuing their own interests in marriage, although their union lasted only 2 years. However, Caesar was one of those who always honestly and fairly fulfilled his promises to people. So in the heroine's head, nothing could go wrong after signing the marriage contract. If the girl had known at that moment how wrong she was, she would never have agreed. But soon Juliet had to prepare for a wedding that could not be avoided. The girl wasn't worried about her appearance, because she was quite beautiful and prepared. But the lady's thoughts still lingered on preparations, as her decision was too unexpected. Orbitienne didn't have time to tell her family anything before she had already signed a marriage contract with Caesar. Today at dinner, the lady had to confess everything to her relatives, keeping silent about the contract. But it turned out that the Marquise was already aware, since Fairheim had spoken to him personally. So the heroine didn't even have to embarrass herself, which is what she thought about all night and all morning. The father was only glad that his daughter got such a handsome and rich husband with a good status. Juliet still felt uneasy, as she did not believe in the reality of what was happening to her. But events took their course, so the girl, with the help of her maids, prepared for the wedding. Everything would have been calm if the older brothers had not run to their beloved sister in panic. They had always wished the girl happiness in marriage, but now she was clearly not in love with Fairheim. The heroine did not expect that she would have to calm her brothers, who sincerely loved her. She hoped that Valentino, who was constantly working, would not find time for her. But the guy turned out to be much more responsible, as he put everything aside for Juliet's wedding. The lady had to put a lot of effort into lying to her brothers, claiming that she already knew the Duke. Only after this did the elder give Miss a soft smile, as he believed her words. But Winslet was much more difficult to fool, since he spent more time with his sister. And now, the guy demanded to talk in private to find out everything from Juliet. Miss initially suspected that the middle brother would not want to take her side so easily. Even the girl's sweet eyes and beautiful appearance will not influence the harmful Winslet. Therefore, the heroine quickly dropped the mask in a conversation with a relative who was distinguished by his attentiveness. A boy is always bigger than his father, and Valentino took care of the girl, spending a lot of time with her. So it angered him that Duke Fairheim was so suddenly trying to marry his sister. The aristocrat knew well that all this time, Caesar had been in love with the emperor's wife. Only now did Juliet admit that she had indeed agreed to a marriage of convenience with the Duke. Although Winslet had suspected this possibility beforehand, the confirmation upset him. Orbitienne wanted his sister to be happily married and not use her husband. But he had no idea that the girl had her own idea of happiness and well-being. She told her brother little because she knew he would never be able to understand her. But the heroine was not one of those who needed bright and sincere love with her partner. While Winslet has not yet married only because he was looking for that lady of his life. Unlike her brother, Juliet was not so sentimental and romantic in relationships. The girl was going to find her own methods to achieve happiness, and no one could stop her. The joy and confidence on the lady's face somewhat softened Winslet's anxiety and worries. In fact, he had no intention of doing anything against his sister's will, even if he didn't agree. It was enough for the guy that his sister could continue to smile happily when they met. This is how easily and naturally Juliet was able to deceive her brother by marrying without love. The heroine really didn't feel sad about this, because everything was working out perfectly for her. After a couple of days of preparation, many aristocrats were invited to this important event. The lady was not at all worried, although such a large-scale event had occurred in her life. But it was clear from the Duke that he could not find himself due to embarrassment and worries. The girl couldn't take her eyes off the guy who was supposed to become her husband for several years. Fairheim tried to maintain his dignity so as not to lose face in the eyes of the invited guests. She never thought that Caesar could be so handsome that he would attract her attention. Juliet's thoughts were focused on her family, who needed to be convinced of her love. All her relatives eagerly gathered around the table, seeing their sister off to a bright future. The father and older brother could hardly hold back the tears that constantly appeared in their eyes. And Winslet was not afraid to show his emotions, because he was closest to his sister. Only by their faces did the heroine realize that she was really getting married, although she hadn't thought about it. Only occasionally did a shadow of sadness creep across Fairheim, because their wedding was not real. But the boy and the girl had already made a contract with each other, and now they were sticking to it. So everyone played their part to the best of their ability, although Caesar could not hide his emotions. The heroine coped much better than her future husband, because she didn't take everything seriously. It was she who became an example for the Duke, so he silently followed the beautiful aristocrat. The girl never wanted to marry for love, so she was happy with everything about this wedding. She saw that Caesar was tormenting himself because he felt nothing for his future wife. Therefore, the heroine kindly reminded that she had the opportunity to refuse the contract. But instead, the lady kissed her husband, sealing their marriage contract in front of the audience. It seemed that the miss would be ready for anything, but the maids still put her in order. It's all because today, Juliet is supposed to have her first wedding night with the Duke. Of course, the girl knew that in reality, she would not have any intimacy with the guy, so the beautifully prepared bed will remain empty until the morning. If the aristocrats had been in love with each other, everything might have turned out differently, and Juliet would have experienced true love, like a fairy tale from many stories. But the reality was that something like this would never happen in the life of the calculating heroine. But the girl herself could not imagine that she would find herself in an extremely awkward situation. Just a few minutes ago, she entered the Duke's chambers, who was already waiting for her. And right after that, Miss noticed a cockroach on the floor, which she feared more than anything in the world. That's why the heroine didn't think for a second before grabbing the sword to deal with the insect. But Caesar misjudged the lady's actions, considering them dangerous to his life. This is how Juliet found herself in a situation where she was suspected of attacking her own husband. Of course, the girl could not, even in theory, threaten a guy who was physically stronger than her. But his wife's behavior confused Ferheim, who did not expect her to grab a sword. Personally, he had not noticed any beetle before that could have scared his wife so much. However, the Duke showed patience towards Juliet so as not to quarrel prematurely. While the heroine was afraid to come closer, the guy began to look for the culprit of all this noise. Literally a minute later, Ferheim realized what had frightened the poor girl so much. Who would have thought that a lady's eyesight would fail her at such an important and exciting moment? She accidentally mistook a normal ball of thread, which posed no danger, for a cockroach. For the first time in her life, Juliet had frightened both herself and her new friend in vain. Until the very end, the girl refused to believe that she had simply given in to panic. But what surprised the heroine most was that her pathetic attempts to justify herself made the guy laugh. They weren't in a relationship where they could be open with each other in private, so the Duke quickly became embarrassed by his laughter, turning away from his newlywed wife. There was a long silence, as neither of the couple knew what to say next. But Caesar still did not turn to the girl, although now for a slightly different reason. It was difficult for the guy to admit that the lady embarrassed him because of her revealing clothes. The maids did a great job dressing the girl in a translucent dress. The heroine herself did not pay attention to this, but she understood why the Duke was so delicate. Ferheim knew that Miss wouldn't find any other clothes for herself anyway, since they were supposed to be in the bedroom. If someone leaves the chambers, the servants will immediately understand that there was no intimacy. Juliet didn't plan to get closer to the guy, but all her plans quickly went awry. Because Miss accidentally slipped on the floor, she was unable to keep her balance. The heroine closed her eyes in fear, but did not feel any pain due to the impact with the cold floor. Instead, Juliet felt herself in the pleasant and warm embrace of her new husband. The lady did not take into account that the best knight's reaction could be so swift and dexterous. Caesar had no trouble catching Miss, even though his clothes were almost off. But now, the guy was only worried about Juliet's incomprehensible state, that she was not answering him. It took the heroine a few more moments to recover from the shock she experienced from the fall, so she didn't immediately notice that she was touching some muscular part of the guy with her hands. Caesar's trained body could not help but attract the attention of any lady, so Juliet was no exception when she stared at the half-naked Ferheim. At that moment, the heroine forgot about her embarrassment, as she was ready to admire the guy for eternity. Caesar always kept himself in shape, gradually building up his muscles and muscle. Therefore, his appearance only sank deeper into the soul of the girl who loved beautiful people. The guy didn't immediately notice that something was clearly wrong with his interlocutor after the fall. Suddenly, Juliet's nose started bleeding, but it wasn't due to physical injuries. The lady was so embarrassed by the guy's closeness that she completely lost control of herself. It would be dangerous for any girl to be near a half-naked and handsome man. After this situation, the awkwardness between the spouses became much stronger. Only the fresh night air became a salvation for Juliet, who blushed with emotion. The heroine always easily succumbed to embarrassment when she was in the company of handsome guys. But Caesar did not suspect this, so he did not give Miss a break, wanting to befriend her. Juliet immediately noticed that the guy accidentally placed his hand next to hers. She hadn't planned to get closer to the Duke, but it was as if he was deliberately leading everything towards this. The lady was no longer sure whether she was just imagining all sorts of stupid things because of the coincidences. But at that moment, the Duke abruptly changed the subject, as he had been grateful to the miss during the wedding. It turned out that the heroine had managed to somehow help the guy at that moment, although she had no idea about it. Although Juliet did not pay any attention to this, Caesar was helped by her touch at the event. In fact, all this time, the lady behaved in such a way that everyone thought they were good lovers. But Ferheim kept forgetting that Juliet's behavior was stipulated in the marriage contract. Meanwhile, the guy should remember that their relationship will end in a couple of years. But instead, the Duke tried to prolong the calm and pleasant moments with the girl. She was one of those who did not ask unnecessary questions, which made it easier for Caesar to communicate with the lady. It was precisely this kind of treatment that was so important for Ferheim, because he had his own secrets. In fact, the heroine didn't need any explanations, since she already knew everything about the Duke. She remembered his story from the book well, but she wasn't going to admit it. So their whole wedding was just a lie, just to keep their families happy. After all, in reality, Caesar still had feelings for the girl who was his childhood friend. And now Juliet couldn't admit that she knew Ferheim too well. However, the silence that constantly appeared between them had already become quite boring for the heroine. So she couldn't think of anything better to do than talk about all sorts of things over a bottle of wine. This was necessary so that in public, it would seem as if they were a really good couple. Heart-to-heart talks were not forbidden in marriage, even if it was just a profitable arrangement. Besides, Juliet was confident that she could perfectly control herself under alcohol. Caesar was not so sure about this, but still, out of boredom, he did not argue with the happy girl. Everyone knows how liberating even one glass of wine can be. What can we say about the whole bottle that the guy and the girl drank between them? Their conversations grew increasingly drunken, but Ferheim was still holding up well after the drink. But the heroine's mind was almost completely clouded, although she ignored this fact. However, soon the girl became sad because she had no friends at all in this world. The lady's sad mood quickly passed on to the Duke, who had been an empath since childhood. All this time, the heroine carried within herself a longing for the past world, trying to get along in this one. But these thoughts were awakened so acutely in her only because of the large amount of wine. Of course, the girl could not even hint to Caesar about what had really happened to her. No matter how good this guy was, he was still part of this book world. Therefore, Ferheim attributed all the strange behavior of his wife to the fact that she was drunk. Although Juliet did start to say too much, she was serious about her friendship with Caesar. The guy couldn't answer the lady because he was afraid of getting attached to someone else. It so happened that, like Ferheim, the heroine had no one to talk to in this world. Of course, she had loved ones, but these people loved the past Juliet who died. Since the girl's childhood, her nanny and middle brother were always there to support her. But the heroine knew that all this great love was not directed at her at all. If it weren't for the transmigration of the soul, the girl would no longer be in this world where a happy ending awaited everyone. Therefore, the heroine did not have any hopes, feeling very lonely among her friends. From the moment Miss entered this body, she was never completely alone. But the girl was afraid of her relatives' reaction if they found out the truth about her real identity. It was for this reason that Juliet tried to live without any attachments to people. After all, then, no matter who leaves her life, Miss will not experience any pain about it. And for the first time in all this time, the girl was faced with eyes that were looking straight at her. The heroine needed support so much, and finally found it in the guy she married. The girl didn't know where Caesar got so much warmth and understanding towards her. It may well be that in Juliet, he saw a younger version of himself, who had made a mistake. Whatever the guy thought, in the end, he agreed to become his wife's friend. This news greatly pleased the heroine, who decided that she would always be alone. In fact, Ferheim could not refuse this request, because he himself needed friends. Moreover, the daughter of the Obertin family seemed to be a fairly understanding and educated lady. Even though the lady was very drunk, she was perfectly aware of what was happening. Ideally, Miss should have made some excuse to go to bed now. But something inside the girl demanded further communication with such a pleasant interlocutor. Caesar smiled so warmly and beautifully that any magazine would want to hire him as a model. The heroine remembered well that in the plot, this guy was always honest and caring. Therefore, she had no doubt that Fairheim could even be trusted with her life. Although from the outside, such an attitude of the girl might even seem somewhat frivolous. They had not known each other for very long, but the lady could not explain why she was behaving so freely. The girl lied that she had heard a lot about the guy from rumors, and he believed this information. Miss had no doubt that before Caesar was only interested in his beloved, so he was blind. But now she got a better look at Fairheim and realized what a good man he was. Whether it was because of the wine or because he wanted to talk, the guy admitted that he was in love. The heroine immediately understood what was being discussed, as she had read about it in the original plot. But she never thought that the Duke would personally confess to her his feelings for another girl. Juliet immediately noticed that Caesar's voice was full of pain, from which he had never gotten rid. Although the lady herself did not love anyone, she could imagine how difficult it was. In the plot, Caesar was devoted only to his childhood friend, who did not even look in his direction. The girl didn't even know what words to use to support the guy who had failed. Fairheim himself constantly pushed away his feelings, trying to be sincerely happy for his beloved. Not long ago, she married a prince, and it was hard to imagine a better candidate for marriage. Even as children, the three of them often played together, as their parents were close to each other. But Berticia, as this lady was called, always looked only at the future heir. The attentive Caesar saw the girl's interest, and therefore remained silent about his feelings for her. This is how the guy lost the girl he loved madly, but never dared to confess. The heroine was horrified when she realized that Fairheim was still hiding his emotions. The guy continued to pretend that he was happy and content with this ending for him. He didn't expect the other person to be angry about something that happened in his past. But the heroine could not remain silent at the sight of the sadness that could be seen in the eyes of the poor Duke. Until now, he had not dared to tell anyone how much pain he had experienced because of love. Because of his kindness, he allowed his friends to be together, but he himself ended up with nothing. Caesar would never have dared to say a word to Berticia, fearing the pain in her eyes. But he didn't think about the fact that his friends didn't care about the Duke's feelings, that he didn't interfere with their love. They were only concerned with their own happiness, which they happily built in private. While Caesar continued to suffer silently from great pain and complete solitude. That is why the drunken heroine was unable to silently watch what was happening. She was sure that the boy should talk to his childhood friends, but Fairheim only smiled in response, since he considered such advice to be sheer stupidity. But Juliet wasn't going to let the guy pretend that everything was okay with him anymore. If she had experienced something similar, it would definitely take her several months to recover. It was strange for Caesar to hear that someone could be angry instead of him about what had happened. Such warm support from a girl could not be unpleasant for a guy who wanted to be heard. So at that moment, Juliet unconsciously became closer to the Duke, although she had not planned it. As a result of her words, the Duke nevertheless sheepishly admitted how much pain he was in. The girl understood the guy perfectly, because he had been unrequitedly in love with one person for so long. She was ready to hug Caesar and cry, but it would not have helped him at all. Although it was Fairheim who was in pain, he had the feeling that the lady was in pain too. The guy never thought that he would ever meet such a sympathetic and understanding person, but he didn't know that the lady was so worried about him only during their marriage. The heroine did not plan to maintain communication with the Duke after they divorced. This came as a surprise to Caesar, who had expected their friendship to be genuine. But Juliet planned to become free again after their 2 years of marriage had passed. Even before her marriage, the lady wanted to travel and was not going to change her dream. Fairheim couldn't get used to the idea that he would be thrown out again after the communication. But in her drunken state, Miss didn't even notice the guy's words, continuing to dream about other cities. She had seen many times how women stopped communicating with their husbands after a high-profile divorce. Moreover, such behavior will provide the girl with much more choice and maneuverability. Therefore, Juliet had no doubt that she had made the right decision. While the lady's thoughts were wandering, Caesar made sure that she did not drink too much. No matter how much the heroine wanted to have another glass, she was faced with a stern refusal from the guy. The aristocrat was used to being stubborn in her desires, so she reached for the wine. But then the Duke's face began to blur before her eyes, as the lady began to fall asleep sitting up. The next morning, Juliet could hardly open her eyes after everything that had happened to her. The girl was no longer sure that she had only drunk 2 glasses, because her head was splitting badly. It felt like she was being forced to wear several heavy dresses at once, so she didn't even open her eyes when she buried her nose in something warm and pleasant. The heroine only thought about how stupid she had behaved last night, since she had drunk too much. She pressed herself against the warm object that was directly in front of her. It was only when Juliet heard the boy's plaintive voice that it made her wake up from her sleep. It turned out that the Duke was lying next to his newlywed wife, who was accidentally touching him. The girl couldn't even imagine that she would wake up in the same bed with a fake husband. All her terrible behavior immediately made the lady even more embarrassed because of the awkwardness of this situation. Juliet would prefer to forget about everything that happened and never remember it again in her life. Caesar seemed to silently share the girl's desire, as he didn't even look in her direction. The guy only gave Juliet brief instructions on how to deal with her hangover. Seeing his broad back turned towards her, the heroine felt even more awkward. But Fairheim didn't seem to think of showing his face to the lady after everything that had happened to them. This only upset Miss even more, as she would have preferred not to quarrel with her husband so quickly. In desperation, the girl asked the guy to at least not be so angry with her after yesterday. But it turned out that the Duke reacted this way to the lady for another reason, which he could not admit. The mystery of what was happening further fueled the curiosity of the girl, who always wanted to know everything. But this time, despite their warm conversations at night, the aristocrat did not want to speak honestly. It seemed as if the Duke was unable to even look Juliet straight in the eyes. But Miss was sure that she hadn't managed to say anything bad last night. The heroine deliberately looked at the guy silently so that he would finally confess his problem to her. The last thing the girl expected to hear was that the Duke usually slept naked. After this, the lady could not come to her senses all day, remembering how her morning had gone. As if the unpleasant feeling of a hangover wasn't enough for her, Caesar also gave her no peace. Who would have thought that the Duke would have such unusual inclinations in his sleep? This could really shock anyone, so Miss was no exception to the rule. Even the guy himself barely admitted that he accidentally, out of habit, went to bed in such a state. Until now, the heroine was ready to sink into the ground, just to not remember this. The girl understood that she could not sleep separately from the Duke, so as to avoid rumors. Therefore, Juliet needed to talk to Caesar about what had happened as soon as possible. The difficulty was that from that moment on, the guy stubbornly avoided meeting with his wife. As soon as he noticed the girl, Fairheim would quickly run away somewhere. The heroine could no longer tolerate this attitude because her contract marriage had only just begun. No matter how ashamed Caesar was to look into the lady's eyes, he could not run away from her forever. All day long, the Duke tried hard to push away thoughts of his unsuccessful wedding night. He was afraid that Juliet might hate him at the very beginning of their relationship. That's why today, the guy deliberately distanced himself from Miss, deciding to sleep in his office. He needed time to decide for himself how to correct this situation in the future. But the guy didn't expect that an important person would already be waiting for him in the office. The whole point was that Juliet came to the room early to wait for her modest husband. Caesar could no longer run away, because it would have been disrespectful to the stubborn girl. The heroine always solved her problems directly, so she was going to touch on all the unpleasant topics. Fairheim partly supported the lady's proposal, although he was unable to speak. Both the guy and the girl began to apologize to each other at the same time for yesterday. Juliet thought that she would be the only one asking for forgiveness, so the lady was surprised. But in reality, the Duke did not even think of blaming his wife for anything, being completely angry at himself. The boy didn't talk to Miss all day long, only because he was consumed by a feeling of shame. He promised the girl that he would be the ideal husband for her, but their relationship began with shame. Juliet never imagined that her husband would have such low self-esteem. The guy was ready to burst into tears from how much he was worried about everything that happened that night. During his speech, he even reminded the heroine of a cute and little puppy that had misbehaved. Initially, the girl planned to severely reprimand her husband for avoiding her all day. But seeing such a sad Duke, the lady could not bring herself to say anything to him, so Juliet quickly changed her anger to mercy. If only the guy wouldn't be even sadder. The lady couldn't allow them to continue running away from each other for such stupid reasons. Moreover, the newlyweds needed to maintain the illusion of a good relationship, so Juliet didn't even consider the option of them sleeping separately. But Caesar couldn't promise that his nightly surprises wouldn't be repeated someday. This time, the heroine managed to keep a calm expression on her face, despite all the embarrassment. In order not to quarrel with her boyfriend, she allowed him to sleep the way he always used to. The initial embarrassment of their conversations was finally overcome, and they could communicate more freely. The girl wished that they could talk calmly, even about the most difficult topics. So the Duke smiled happily at the lady, who had so easily sorted out their problems. Juliet was surprised that the guy was nice to girls he didn't feel anything for. She spent her entire life trying to avoid men because she didn't want to fall in love with them. But now Caesar himself was closing the distance, and the lady could not say anything against him. Fairheim approached his wife cautiously as he noticed something in her hair. The guy was determined to rid Juliet of this thing, even if she didn't notice it. At that moment, the heroine could only hope that the Duke did not hear the beating of her heart. In just a few seconds, Caesar had completed the task he had set for himself. He smiled radiantly at the girl, finally moving a few steps away from her. The heroine was almost blinded by the sight of the guy, whose smile could melt any heart. Therefore, the lady once again felt embarrassed, because the situation was conducive to this. The girl tried so hard not to think about anything romantic anymore, but the guy ruined all her plans. Therefore, Miss suggested that they set rules to avoid unpleasant situations in the future. Caesar was clearly surprised by this idea, as he usually didn't bother with communication. But Juliet saw that without rules, they would not be able to establish contact with each other. Before this, both partners had not discussed their lives in detail, so the lady had many questions. Fairheim could not refuse such an offer, since he himself did not know how to behave. No matter how sweetly they smiled at each other, awkwardness still remained. So the heroine took the decision on this issue into her own hands, because in her past life she had kept good records. Caesar had no choice but to silently follow his clever wife. Of course, Juliet noticed the shadow that quickly flashed across her partner's face. The whole point was that the guy still couldn't believe that everything that was happening to them was real. Once again, some thought came to the Duke, and he could not calmly admit it. Although the heroine knew a lot about the plot, she did not have the ability to read minds. Therefore, the girl sincerely did not understand why the Duke was behaving strangely again. It turned out that Caesar had only just realized that his possessions did not belong to him alone. Fairheim wasn't used to sharing a bedroom with anyone, which is why he was so embarrassed at that moment. Circumstances forced him to get used to the new relationship with his wife as quickly as possible. But the guy needed time to finally believe in the existence of marriage. Juliet always calmly listened to any confessions from her new husband. And this time, the Duke's reaction seemed incredibly sweet and attractive to the girl. Caesar always blamed himself for everything, almost never allowing himself to show his emotions to anyone else. And the lady saw a problem in this, because the guy was trying not to rely on other people, while the girl would like them to trust each other while they were married. She did her best to charm the Duke, although she understood that he would not forget his beloved. However, the heroine's actions quickly bore fruit, as Caesar quickly began to feel better. Juliet's emerald eyes enchanted him more and more, although the guy did not admit it. The heroine had long since become accustomed to the idea that she had agreed to a real marriage contract. She quickly realized what she had the right to do, since she was now the Duke's wife. Therefore, for the next 2 years, Miss planned to remain faithful only to this man. And Caesar completely shared the feelings and desires of the lady whom he himself chose as his wife. Gradually, they began to allow themselves more and more intimate touches, although they were embarrassed. As soon as the heroine sat down to come up with rules for marriage, she suddenly became more serious. The girl immediately established that they were not allowed to get close physically, but they could talk. But after her words, a heavy silence suddenly fell over the room, as the Duke said nothing. The lady was sure that she had foreseen everything, but she could not predict the guy's reactions and thoughts. No matter how hard Juliet tried, the rules still didn't depend solely on her. Therefore, Caesar began to challenge the ban on touching, because they should be together in public. The girl hadn't thought that far ahead, so she only now noticed such a gap in her calculations. But the guy attended events much more often than the ladies, so he immediately thought about them. So he offered to allow touching if they both agreed to it. The heroine considered this change correct, and even necessary to maintain the illusion of a relationship. Soon they will inevitably have to accompany each other to various banquets. During such events, it was impossible to resist a dance that was full of touches, and Juliet couldn't allow herself to stand aside, feeling people whispering about her. Besides, the girl only now remembered that Caesar would not do anything bad to her. Thus, several more points in the contract were quickly adjusted for the better. While they were coming up with the rules, Fairheim couldn't take his eyes off the girl working. The heroine was so engrossed in the agreement that she didn't notice the guy's sweet glance from the side. Juliet did almost all the work for the Duke, since she had the ideas from the start. But the guy couldn't shift all the responsibility onto the shoulders of the sweet and fragile aristocrat. That's why he himself admitted that he didn't come up with that many rules for the agreement. The heroine initially did not demand anything from the Duke, because she only needed his approval. But when he began to suggest additional points, the lady approved them quite quickly. She liked the suggestion not to have lovers, as this would have a bad effect on her reputation. Juliet was one of those people who forgot about everything else in the world when she was immersed in an interesting matter. Therefore, she was already thinking that after 2 years, they might well be in love. Only now did the lady notice that Caesar had not said anything to her for some time. It was obvious from the guy that he was so lost in thought due to an incomprehensible insult. The heroine did not have time to get used to the fact that her husband was such a vulnerable person inside. But she knew one good way that could cheer up absolutely anyone. So the girl approached the guy without asking his permission for such decisive actions. Caesar did not know how he should react to such behavior from the miss, whom he did not want to offend. At this moment, Juliet was more determined than ever, so it was useless to argue with her. She came up with the idea of holding a short therapy session with the Duke to make him feel a little better. And for this, the girl needed the guy to obediently close his eyes while she blew on him. All the lady's actions might have seemed strange, but they had a calming effect. This was exactly the kind of support that Caesar had always lacked, so he came to his senses a little. But the guy was much more embarrassed than the heroine could have imagined. So he said he would leave the room for a moment to get some fresh air. Juliet had no idea that her actions had only embarrassed the Duke. She noticed that Fairheim's ears had turned red, but she couldn't explain to herself what it meant. The lady had never seen anything like it from the brothers before, so she had nothing to compare it to. The heroine had little contact with men in her past life, which is why she was confused. Caesar was soon able to calm down, so he returned to the conversation with his amazing wife. During this time, the lady had time to think about a lot, so she had something to discuss with the Duke. But it turned out that the guy himself took part in the agreement, since he came up with another rule. This was a first for Fairheim, but he tried his best. Juliet was ready to listen to the guy, no matter what proposal he made to their agreement. The lady was surprised that the Duke wanted to spend more time together as a couple. The heroine did not seek to get closer to Caesar, because they were only given 2 years together. Besides, the Duke had such a packed schedule that it was difficult to plan anything else. But the guy was worried that the girl might feel awkward alone in his huge estate. He had no idea that the heroine was often left alone at home and was not sad about it. That is why the guy sincerely wanted to spend as much time as possible with the lady. The heroine could not get rid of the warm feelings that arose in her near the Duke. No one had ever tried so hard for Mrs. Caesar did in a couple of days. But Juliet was still not sure that Fairheim really cared about her that much. But the girl's careless words once again made the Duke doubt himself. Caesar still had many years to work on his self-esteem so that he wouldn't worry about everything. But the heroine did not plan to make Caesar doubt his actions in any way. The whole point was that the lady had already imagined a marriage created out of love. And to achieve this, couples spent a lot of time with each other, sharing all meals. Moreover, most often they would engage in some hobby together that they both enjoyed. And Juliet understood perfectly well how difficult it was to maintain such a relationship on a permanent basis. Unlike her, Caesar was truly ready to do everything to ensure that their couple would be happy for 2 years. While the heroine was constantly thinking about what she would do at the end of the marriage contract, because of the difference in desires between the boy and the girl, various embarrassing misunderstandings arose. The Duke had to watch his ambitions so as not to say too much. Juliet felt that she was getting closer to Caesar, and then he was moving away from her again. She could not explain the constant leaps in the behavior of her husband, whom she knew little. It felt like Fairheim was simply afraid to be completely honest about his emotions. Once again, the heroine had to take full responsibility in order to get closer to the guy. So she asked the Duke for permission, so that they could hold hands for a while. It was quite expected that Caesar would blush again at such an embarrassing request. At such moments, Fairheim seemed to the girl like a real innocent and sweet baby. She did not rush him into making a decision, as she did not want to accidentally cause him discomfort. Even though it was temporary, the heroine tried to become a good wife for her husband. The guy was pleased to hear that he wasn't the only one willing to invest in this relationship. His sad look made it clear how tired the Duke was of unrequited feelings. But what angered the lady even more was that Caesar was constantly apologizing to her. The young man's character was unusually soft for a girl who was many times more confident than him. Juliet would like the guy to finally be able to become happy within these 2 years. Although Fairheim was not sure that he could forget his love, he was ready to try. The only thing that upset him was that their marriage was just a profitable agreement for both of them. Therefore, the Duke was wary of the advice of the girl with whom he would have to part. However, Juliet believed that they could communicate well, despite all the nuances, all because the lady was already charmed by the beauty and sweet behavior of her husband. So now it was the Duke's turn to look for the positives in such a strange situation as theirs. The girl's cheerful compliments amused Caesar, who had been smiling little lately, but Mrs. Hart felt lighter when she saw that Fairheim had not yet forgotten how to laugh. The heroine sincerely wished that the guy could overcome his insecurity and embarrassment. And in the end, Caesar could not resist giving the lady a compliment worthy of her. Juliet had never received such nice words before, so she was flattered. The girl's embarrassment, who was so desperately trying to calm the guy down, knew no bounds at that moment. At first, the heroine even thought that she had simply misheard her husband's words. Although the miss herself paid compliments to the Duke, she was not prepared for reciprocal actions. Caesar was glad that he had managed to embarrass such a beautiful and sweet aristocrat, while Juliet completely forgot that they had actually drawn up an agreement. The Duke did not expect that the lady would ultimately forbid him from paying her any compliments under the contract, but the girl was not going to give in on this point, as she did not want to be embarrassed anymore. She was afraid that feelings might flare up between them if they communicated like that. The heroine had no intention of coming between the Duke and his beloved, according to the original plot. No matter how much the lady wanted to help the guy, she could do nothing with the love of his life. So Juliet couldn't let Caesar fall in love with her, because their friendship was temporary. It would be a grave mistake on her part towards the exhausted Fairheim, but the Duke had no idea what thoughts were in the head of his beautiful wife. He was sad that the lady had signed a contract prohibiting him from complimenting her. Moreover, the girl also asked the Duke to be stricter with the other aristocrats while they were married. As a result, in just a few words, Caesar found himself tied hand and foot, which he was not happy about. However, the guy easily signed the contract, since this relationship was important to him. He was not averse to following every point exactly, as long as their marriage lasted well. Never before had Juliet been so serious as when she was drawing up the rules. They sat until the very night, trying to come up with all the rules that would suit them. And now the time had come for them to sleep together. But for some reason, the Duke could not fall asleep in bed for a long time. The guy lay motionless for several hours, just to avoid accidentally disturbing Juliet. In the end, he still got up on the spot, since it was beyond his strength to lie there any longer. So many interesting things happened that day that Caesar's thoughts returned to the past. The heroine was so tired today that she had been sleeping peacefully for a long time, not paying attention to her husband. To avoid accidentally scaring the girl in the morning, Fairheim dressed prudently. In fact, he wanted to talk to the lady about a lot of things, but now was not the time. In his dream, Juliet seemed even more beautiful to Caesar, as she maintained a serene appearance. He had a feeling that the lady was about to open her eyes, and their conversations would continue. The guy managed to imagine the emotions that the miss would experience when she noticed his gaze on her. The girl's sweet voice seemed to actually sound in the Duke's head, although this was not the case. Fairheim himself could not understand why. When looking at Juliet, he was constantly drawn to smile. Previously, he was burdened by the constant loneliness in the huge estate, which was not needed. But now the Duke was glad that he had such a wife, albeit under a marriage contract. Juliet occupied all of Caesar's thoughts in a short period of time, which he did not immediately notice. What hurt the guy the most was that the girl still didn't recognize him, even though they had already met. He didn't notice a drop of understanding on the lady's face when he arrived at the estate for the marriage, but on the day of their meeting, the Duke forever remembered this red-haired girl of the Orbitian family. But at that moment, the lady had drunk so much that she sincerely did not remember anything about that day. So Caesar was once again left alone with his feelings and desire for a bright future, while the heroine slept peacefully, unaware of the guy who thought only of her. The girl was clearly dreaming of something good, since even in her sleep, she was smiling sweetly at something. The next morning, Juliet woke up feeling better than she had ever felt before. She immediately guessed that Caesar had already gone off on business, since the bed was empty. This upset the girl a little, who didn't like to sit idle even in such a situation, At that moment, the maids assigned to Miss Fairheim burst into the room with permission. The lady reacted calmly to the fact that she would now have her own personal retinue of assistants. The maids looked young, but their eyes were shining with the desire to perform their duties well. That's why Juliet didn't kick any of them out, despite their young age. What surprised the heroine most was that the Duke was still waiting to have breakfast together. The girl thought that the guy would eat first, because he got up several hours before her. The maid, Amber, kindly explained that Fairheim had deliberately decided to wait for his wife. But Juliet didn't see the need for such actions. Even despite the marriage, she honestly admitted to the maids that she had not yet had time to get used to her new status. Before, neither the brothers nor the father could ever eat with the girl who was alone. So the heroine got used to it. But the maids reacted with surprise to such statements. The girls felt that the Orbachin family had good and strong relationships. Judging by the way her relatives behaved at the wedding, Juliet herself would have thought the same. But the truth was that they never had time to communicate with their youngest daughter. Therefore, the lady was not worried when it came to doing something alone. She didn't remember a single moment when the entire Orbitian family went somewhere together. But the assistants were horrified by this situation because they considered it wrong. The lady had to lie that she had enough communication at the estate, since the family was kind to her. But in fact, the heroine kept thinking that she was not the real Juliet. And it turned out that in rare moments, the family paid attention to something other than her. That is why the miss felt so awkward in the company of maids who were accustomed to something else. The maid, on behalf of all the assistants, promised that they would certainly brighten up the mistress's loneliness. All the maids were of the same opinion, as they did not want to leave Juliet alone. This is how the heroine accidentally created another misunderstanding, which now affected the servants. Thoughts about this did not give the lady any peace even a little later, when she switched to food. The girl realized that she had initially created the image of a young and spoiled miss in front of everyone. But it turned out that she was a sensitive and lonely person, which aroused everyone's sympathy. So when Juliet agreed to marry the Duke, no one was surprised. After all, Caesar was famous for his boundless kindness and caring, if you don't count his appearance. As much as the lady did not want it, rumors and misunderstandings could no longer be avoided. Fairheim, who had good observation skills, noticed that something was wrong with the lady, but the heroine could not honestly admit to the guy that she had said the wrong words to the maids. Besides, there were too many witnesses around for Juliet to be telling the truth. So the girl turned everything into feelings, saying that she hadn't had breakfast with anyone for a long time. The heroine was truly happy that she finally had good company. The Duke's response was not long in coming, because he was experiencing exactly the same feelings at that moment. The girl didn't notice that the guy blushed a little from embarrassment while he was speaking. All that mattered to Juliet was that they both didn't mind eating at the same table as husband and wife. Caesar behaved this way only because he had grown tired of being constantly alone in the estate. His quick agreement confused the lady, who did not expect the guy to be for her. Unbeknownst to the girl, Fairheim was constantly making attempts to bring them closer. And this time, the heroine wanted to take a walk alone with her husband, because she needed to talk to him. But such honesty and conversation with the girl confused the Duke, who misunderstood her. Juliet had nothing romantic in mind when she wanted to talk without the servants. This modest guy increasingly began to seem funny to the heroine, who loved beautiful people. After some time, the boy and girl managed to get out into the estate's garden alone. Before starting a frank conversation, Juliet once again made sure that they were alone. The Duke did not understand why the lady was so cautious, but he easily calmed her worries. Even the guy could see that Miss really wanted to discuss something important with him. For the first time in a long time, the heroine was so excited about the upcoming topic of conversation. The whole point was that the servants acted as if they didn't know about their marriage contract. Juliet hadn't had time to think about this question before, so she didn't know anything. So she accidentally said unnecessary things to the maids, who quickly believed her. And now the heroine was forced to endure the fact that the assistants constantly took care of her. The lady's thoughts were racing so wildly that Caesar could not understand what she was talking about. Only now did the lady realize that the rumors about her morning conversation had not yet reached the guy. So Juliet had to tell the maids from the very beginning what she had told them. Having listened carefully to the girl, the Duke did not see any big problems for them in her story. Miss was surprised that after all her words, the Duke also wanted to hear a story about her past. She was from another world, so she only partially remembered what happened to Juliet. So it was problematic for the heroine to satisfy Caesar's curiosity on this delicate topic. But the Duke was ready to listen to even a boring story, since something in the girl's past strongly attracted him. With a beaming smile on his face, he explained that he would not allow misunderstandings if he knew more. Juliet had no arguments left against such a handsome and delicate man. Therefore, the girl had to talk about her sad past as briefly as possible. She was genuinely worried about how sad the story of the real Juliet was. Her mother died during childbirth, so the girl was always alone from childhood. Because of this, the little girl had no shared memories with this woman. At her mother's funeral, Juliet was the only person who felt nothing. The girl was too young and spent so little time with her mother that she did not experience pain. But before, the heroine had not thought about how difficult it was for this young girl. Even now, the lady felt awkward, because she had not lived this sad life herself, while the real Juliet locked herself away from everyone in her room all day long. The current lady was ready to travel the world as soon as her marriage ended. During all this time, the Duke heard only a little about what the daughter of the Marquis Orbetian was like. But in reality, Juliet did not at all like the seclusion to which she resorted. No matter how much bad Caesar had to endure, he could live freely in this world. And that's why the heroine envied him, because she didn't even know why she ended up in this young body. She understood perfectly well that no one would believe the truth anyway, so she didn't say anything. But suddenly, Caesar suspected that something terrible might have happened to the girl in the past. Juliet didn't expect her interlocutor to be so attentive and sensitive. Fairheim often took the lady's words that she should have been more careful too seriously. Only now did the guy remember that the maid Amber knew about their agreement. This news was unpleasant for Juliet, who tried to hide it from everyone. Miss would never have guessed about this, because the woman behaved perfectly calmly. The Duke suspected that Amber wanted their relationship to develop into something more. She had looked after Caesar since childhood, so she saw all his love torments very well. So now, Juliet won't be able to escape the close attention of the kind maid. The guy didn't even notice that, in an instant, his stomach started to rumble in dissatisfaction. Fairheim would have preferred to hide it, but the heroine immediately guessed what was going on. She had noticed before that the Duke was not used to having breakfast so late according to schedule, but Caesar was so faithful to the girl that he did not eat until she woke up. In fact, the Duke only did this because he wanted to be near the lady, but now his morning act could be called more stupid than chivalrous. The guy didn't think at all that his hungry state could affect his training, and Juliet couldn't even really scold such a handsome and attractive Duke. Nevertheless, the girl managed to explain to her husband how important eating was. The heroine didn't want Caesar to suffer from hunger every morning because of her, but the Duke's puppy dog eyes hinted that he would very much like not to miss morning meetings. However, the guy didn't know how to combine breakfast with a girl and his own hard training. He was ready for any alternative, just so as not to ruin the relationship at the very beginning. To this end, Juliet decided to attend the guy's training sessions and learn fencing. It was only here that Caesar was worried that he would not be able to devote the necessary time to the lady. He was well aware of how deeply he became absorbed in his studies when he concentrated on them. The heroine instantly felt sorry for the guy who so strongly wanted to be near her. But Juliet really wanted to attend training, since she had already learned fencing. Fairheim didn't know anything about this, because Miss tried not to tell anyone about the training. But the lady had long been eager to further hone the skills she had begun to acquire. And Caesar would not have been able to prevent this in any way, even if he had tried very hard. The only thing was, the heroine had so little experience that she needed gentle training. And the Duke, with his skills, could easily have taught the girl, but he just didn't want to. Juliet quickly noticed that the atmosphere had suddenly become more oppressive and unpleasant again. But the girl didn't even remember saying anything unpleasant to her dear husband. Caesar was so deep in thought that he still silently took Juliet's hand. Only after this did the guy remember that her hands felt rougher than those of aristocrats. Indeed, Juliet's training showed that her arms were quite strong. The heroine was not worried about the condition of her hands, as she never tried to be a lady. She herself noticed that the Duke's hands were calloused from constant training. At that moment, the boy and the girl unconsciously held their hands in each other's arms. The lady blushed from this, although their touching had been approved from the very beginning. The Duke himself did not expect that he would find the girl's hands so pleasant. He realized too late that the moment of touching had indeed dragged on for too long. The guy was so absorbed in thinking about the lady's training that he stopped paying attention to everything around him. This time, The girl's heart was not all right, because she remembered the warmth from the Duke's hands. The heroine was still afraid of falling in love with Caesar, so she was the first to leave. It was time for them to get down to business, as the walk had dragged on, which Juliet reminded them of. The awkwardness haunted the girl for some time, no matter how hard she tried to forget about it. For some reason, communicating with Caesar became increasingly easier for the lady, although she did not put in much effort. The heroine was only afraid that the guy could again, for some reason, close himself off from her. However, Fairheim had learned his lesson and was not going to cause any more trouble. This made the girl happy, as she didn't want to think about restoring the relationship again. But she didn't expect the Duke to excitedly ask her a counter-question about escaping. Juliet felt like she had made it clear that she would not run away from her husband, but the guy's anxiety also affected the lady's condition, so she also began to worry. Juliet was unable to quickly come up with sufficient arguments to support her points, but in the end, the whole situation was saved by Caesar, who gallantly changed the subject of their awkward conversation. The heroine didn't even think about how much her husband had become attached to her presence, but it turned out that the guy would be sad if the girl started to give in prematurely. Fairheim could outpace anyone in the speed with which he could close in on the people around him. Seeing the Duke's sad smile, Juliet immediately understood why he had such concerns. After all, the guy's first lover was the one who gradually began to distance herself from him, and Caesar could only silently look at the girl, since it was not in his nature to interfere. Only one guy knew how many tears he shed because of his unrequited love. Every time the heroine remembered this, she felt incredibly sad and lonely. Fairheim had long since become accustomed to pretending not to feel emotions when he was in pain, so Juliet tried with all her might to convey that he had to tell the truth with her. The Duke felt better from the girl's promise that she would not run away from him without explanation. For some reason, he wanted to believe her beautiful emerald eyes, which seemed to look into his very heart. The heroine had a hard time believing that such a handsome guy could truly want nothing for himself. It seemed to her that he was simply enduring the circumstances around him, hurting his heart more and more. Even now, seeing the sadness on his wife's face, Caesar's first reaction was to ask for forgiveness. But Juliet had grown tired of the Duke's politeness, who always thought only of others. Before she left, the lady planned to prove to Fairheim that he was better than he thought he was. Now, only the maid knew about their marriage contract, and she would definitely keep quiet about it. Little was known to the butler because of his job, but he too was a silent man. Therefore, it was the guy and the girl who could accidentally reveal their fake relationship. So Juliet suggested that from now on, they should hold each other's hands in public without asking. Such a simple touch can say a lot about people who are married. The heroine was afraid that if she continued to push Caesar away, his bitter smile would return. The guy seemed fine now, but who knows how quickly his mood could change. While the lady was the Duke's wife, she had no intention of allowing him to fall into the abyss of sad emotions. The girl's eyes glowed with a stubborn fire, because nothing could make her change her mind. Caesar felt uneasy at the amount of stubbornness he noticed on the face of his dear wife. Unexpectedly, the heroine heard a sudden compliment from her husband about her appearance. Such pleasant words did not leave the girl indifferent, which is what she had been afraid of all this time. The lady immediately grumbled and reminded him that compliments between them were prohibited by the marriage contract. It's all because Juliet inevitably started to feel emotions for the guy after this, and her plans included being free to travel after they divorced in 2 years. Instead of another apology, the Duke laughed this time, which was already a step towards his change. This is the only reason why the heroine did not scold Fairheim, who sincerely tried to behave differently. Caesar smiled so sunny that he could change the whole weather around him to a pleasant mood. Peace and idyll have finally come between the boy and girl who had been working towards this for a long time. But the heroine's thoughts continued to jump from place to place, remembering all the important moments. Juliet had indeed forgotten to clarify one important question, but she managed to remember it now. The girl was interested in the Duke's opinion on more romantic physical contacts. The guy got used to what was happening so slowly that he didn't have time to think about this nuance. But the lady was serious, because she needed to know how to behave in public. But Caesar became embarrassed like a little child when the conversation turned to their kisses. It was clear that at that moment, the guy was not ready to maintain such an embarrassing conversation. Miss shared the Duke's emotions, but this question had been bothering her for a long time. In fact, the couple had already had their first kiss, but this only made it that much more exciting. Juliet was a person who loved to always plan everything in advance. But the Duke didn't think about the little things until the very end, as he was constantly fantasizing about his beloved. But Caesar liked these features of the aristocrat, which were so different from his own. The only thing was, he wasn't brave enough to decide to kiss without permission. The heroine never thought that Furheim would speak so directly about the fact that they would have to become closer. It turned out that Caesar personally was mentally prepared for something like this, although he could not avoid embarrassment. So it was Juliet who was embarrassed by his words, since she had not thought about carrying out the kiss. As stupid as it may be, the lady only wanted to discuss the possibility, not move on to action. So the girl set the conditions that she wanted to have her first real kiss by the lake. Furheim immediately supported this sweet and romantic idea from his enterprising wife. Juliet felt much calmer when they discussed such important nuances of their lives together. The girl realized too late that the Duke seemed increasingly attractive to her. Meanwhile, the guy began to compose a legend for their first meeting, which actually happened. But the heroine didn't remember this at all, so she took the Duke's words at face value. It remained a mystery to the girl why Caesar suggested a tavern as their meeting place, but the guy was quickly able to convince her that many would believe such a romantic story. Furheim never got around to admitting to the lady that he hadn't actually made anything up. As soon as the heroine returned to the estate, she immediately and stubbornly set to work. The butler selflessly helped the girl, surprised at how easily everything worked out for her. The whole point was that in this world, the lady had already managed her father's estate in his absence. Little Juliet really learned all the necessary skills from the best teachers. But the heroine used skills from her past life, because she came here as an adult. The butler communicated with the lady with extreme delicacy, as she increasingly surprised him with her knowledge. But Juliet carelessly said that in a couple of years, she would no longer be in this place. In response, the assistant honestly admitted that such words made him sad. Miss hadn't yet gotten used to how sentimental everyone was in this place. She had agreed on everything with the Duke in advance, so she didn't have to worry about it any further. But the butler looked as if he had no intention of letting the girl go free. Juliet was at least satisfied with the fact that he was the ideal assistant in managing the huge estate. As soon as the girl had finished her work matters, she quickly made her way to her wardrobe. The heroine always loved to dress up, but the constant dresses had already begun to irritate her eyes. Luckily for the girl, the maids supported her desire to change her image a little, so Juliet thought again about how she should fulfill her marital duty. She couldn't consult the maids about this, and the Duke stubbornly avoided this topic in conversations. However, it was soon time to go to training, so the lady put everything aside. Juliet was looking forward to the change of career, which she had been eagerly awaiting. Moreover, Caesar did everything to ensure that the training field was completed in the best possible way. It's all because the guy spent most of his time on it, so he tried. Any imperial knight would envy such a training place. The girl almost immediately ran into Caesar, who was busy training with his subordinates. It was clear from the guy that he was a little tired, but a cheerful smile still shone on his face. Juliet had no hope that she would be able to withstand training from her husband. But in fact, the Duke had no plans to burden the girl with his strict rules. He had enough subordinates who tried to rest at any possible moment. The heroine recalled that during her visit, the guys tried to train much harder. Furheim knew about this, as he saw that the knights wanted to set a good example for the ladies. Miss had no idea that Caesar's subordinates could be so uncontrollable on weekdays, but she believed that such a skilled guy would always be able to find an approach to stubborn students. The Duke immediately beamed at his wife's praise, as he always found that pleasant. But what interested the girl most were the knights who were in full swing fighting. She immediately became interested in this, as she herself would like to take part in the duel. But the Duke reacted with fear to the lady's desire, because he was worried about her safety. One of the assistants immediately offered his candidacy for the battle to the aristocrat. However, Caesar, with one glance, made it clear to him that the knight had better move away. Juliet was not one to give up quickly when she really wanted something. That's why the girl asked Furheim to fight her personally, because he knows how to control power. This came as an even bigger surprise to the guy, as he had hoped that Miss would change her mind. But the heroine's gaze already lit up at the mere thought that she would take part in the battle. She was sure that she couldn't hurt the guy anyway, so she didn't worry about it. The heroine herself understood perfectly well that her body could never harm the Duke's body. While they were arguing, the knights could clearly hear all the awkward conversations between the master and mistress. But Caesar personally did not pay any attention to them, as he was carried away by an argument with the lady. So it came as a surprise to him when the knights asked him not to discuss the night's adventures. Neither the guy nor the girl even suspected that their communication looked exactly like this from the outside. They realized their mistake only when their assistants delicately informed them of it. But the knights could no longer be convinced of their accidentally established opinion. So Juliet and Caesar accidentally created even more good rumors about their relationship. The Duke hastened to take the girl away from people who might overhear them. The guy was not going to change his decision, because Juliet's safety was important to him, but the heroine still hoped that Fairheim would change his mind and fight her. The guy couldn't console the lady in any way, since he didn't know how to communicate with women in that way. He had to honestly admit that, apart from fears, there were no other excuses. Caesar's stubbornness increasingly irritated the girl, who was used to achieving everything. She wouldn't have been so offended if they had really been close, as the Duke's loyal knights now thought. The heroine even allowed herself to manipulatively attack the Duke, just to get her way. The guy quickly got hooked, and his reactions became much more emotional and anxious. Juliet quickly realized that she had gotten carried away and soon stopped manipulating. For a moment, she wondered if Caesar would react as strongly after the divorce. All this time, Fairheim tried not to remind himself of the moment of separation a couple of years later, and the heroine lived only with thoughts of when she would finally become completely free. Therefore, she did not expect that the guy would refuse to communicate with any other girls. Juliet had not yet realized how much this poor Caesar had become attached to her. After all, the Duke no longer wanted to see anyone in his circle, having forgotten even his first love. The lady would not rush to conclusions, as she was sure that anything could happen in the future. Caesar understood why Miss was saying this, but he did not support her vision of their destiny. He delicately reminded them that while they were still together, this was precisely what they should be thinking about. The Duke felt bad that the girl was remembering their divorce, but he smiled. His smile captured the heart of the heroine, who was already embarrassed at this awkward moment. However, Miss could not shake off the thought that she was only a wife by marriage contract. But even this did not change the fact that the Duke felt happiness next to the girl. From her face, he saw that Juliet was ready to rejoice and be sad with him. Therefore, Caesar asked the lady not to mention their contract anymore for 2 years, but Juliet immediately considered such a proposal too dangerous to carry out. After all, this meant that she would involuntarily be drawn closer to such an attractive person. The girl was not sure that she could not help but fall in love with the Duke as they grew closer to each other. Her own fears did not give her peace, so the heroine reminded herself of the length of her marriage. But the guy reminded that it was impossible to become happy while you had limited time for joy. He tried to do everything to ensure that these 2 years would fly by for both of them. Seeing such a sweet look from the Duke, Juliet did not find the strength in herself to refuse him. So now the girl will have to learn to forget about the boundaries of an ordinary contract wife. After all, Fairheim didn't allow her to think about it, even if she was drunk from head to toe. The boy and girl sealed a new agreement with their fingers, which would affect their future. For the first time in a long time, Juliet smiled genuinely as her worries finally subsided. All this time, the girl tormented herself with unnecessary thoughts, but now she was able to completely relax. The Duke was glad to see the happy state of his wife, for whom he was ready to do anything. He whispered something quietly to the lady, but she couldn't hear anything because of the gusts of wind. Juliet was instantly interested in the guy's words, which she had not understood a few seconds ago. But it took Caesar so much effort to make that short confession, so he didn't risk talking to the lady again, but instead smiled cheerfully at her. The guy deliberately distracted Juliet with conversation so that she would not think about his words. But inside he continued to worry, because Miss was about to hear an unpleasant lie soon. However, for now, the heroine was uncontrollably happy about any little thing, as she had thrown the contract out of her head. Caesar was pleased to see the girl in such a state, because he, too, quickly became infected with emotions. The whole point was that Juliet had been trying to persuade the guy to fight her all day long. In the end, the Duke gave in, because he could no longer stand the sad eyes of his sweet wife. This was exactly what the girl was happy about, since she was already looking forward to the duel. Of course, the heroine used a little blackmail to quickly achieve her goal, but the lady couldn't give up so easily when it came to fighting one of the best knights. Fairheim was surprised that his wife was so eager to fight him. Juliet explained this by saying that any person would dream of such an easy duel. Since childhood, the girl was accustomed to getting abrasions and scratches after training on the field. The Duke could not even imagine that his own father would allow his daughter to engage in such a manly occupation. It just turned out that Juliet never asked her father's opinion, and that he didn't communicate with her. Once again, Caesar was amazed at how bad the relationship between Miss and her family was. Juliet was used to not telling anything to her relatives, who rarely showed up at home. The girl had no doubt that her decision to remain silent was the right one. The lady knew perfectly well that her father would not have allowed her to learn fencing, just as he would not have allowed knights. This is all because he was too worried about his only daughter. Even though he had little contact with her, Fairheim immediately noticed that the love her father gave her did not bring happiness to the girl. He knew better than anyone what emotions a person experienced in complete solitude. The heroine could no longer lie next to the guy who was so worried about her, so Juliet honestly admitted that no one in her family really knew her real self. Relatives were always only concerned with work and status, which they supported with all their might. But Caesar did not want to put up with such an attitude, wanting to always help his wife. He fervently promised that he would be there for the girl, no matter what stories she told him. From now on, the Duke wanted even more to become a good friend and a great husband to Juliet. His warm hands calmed the heroine, who was worried a lot about her past. She was completely confused and didn't know whether she should continue to let the guy love her as his wife. The problem was that Juliet found it difficult to refuse Caesar's care, and the Duke was not one of those who would be able to figure out such an awkward nuance on his own. But now, Miss was not ready to talk about this topic, so she quickly changed their conversation. The girl reminded that she had received 2 invitations to important tea parties among aristocrats, and now she was faced with a choice, because she did not know whether she should go to any of them. Caesar already knew that his wife generally did not like attending such events. Her sweet look indicated that the girl really couldn't make a decision on her own. At the same time, Juliet did not say anything about whether she wanted to attend the tea party with the aristocrats. The heroine did not expect that the guy would pay attention to her feelings when deciding this issue. The last thing the Duke wanted was for a lady to force herself to go to tea with other ladies. Only now did the heroine realize that the Duke had unconsciously cared about her, first and foremost. In fact, the girls really didn't want to go to this hotbed of snakes and poisonous people. But if Juliet misses tea, then unpleasant rumors will immediately begin to spread about her. Therefore, the heroine wanted to prove with her entire presence that she was a harmless person. Now the lady communicated well with her husband, without even using any pretense, and she was going to show the aristocrats how beautiful their married couple was. Caesar approved of this attitude of the girl, for whose emotional state he was very worried. As a result, the heroine was able to fall into a deep sleep within a short time that night. She didn't worry about anything because she was able to lay out all her problems to her husband. But the guy, as usual, couldn't sleep because of the annoying and disturbing thoughts in his head. Only now did he confess to the lady that something had been troubling him, although Juliet had heard nothing. Since their marriage, Berticia constantly sent letters to her friend, but he did not answer her. The guy found the behavior of the girl who refused to come to his wedding strange, and now she asked to meet Juliet, assuring him that she wanted to become friends with her. At the moment of their first meeting, the guy immediately fell in love with the girl, although he himself did not know why. But he was destined to remain alone, since Berticia loved the heir to the throne. The Duke could not bring himself to attend his friend's wedding because he was in pain. He couldn't think of anything better to do than visit one of the famous taverns in the city. It was there that the guy met the red-haired girl, who was already drunk to the point of unconsciousness. Caesar did not plan to enter into conversation with anyone, as he was immersed in his feelings. But Juliet grabbed the guy tightly, who accidentally asked her for forgiveness because of the collision. This is how Fairheim found himself trapped in a situation that he himself would have wanted to avoid at all costs. But the beautiful girl had already asked the guy to have a drink with her so that they could have fun together. At that moment, the lady's sweet smile sank so deep into the Duke's soul that he could not refuse her. It turned out that only Caesar remembered this chance meeting in the tavern. The heroine was so drunk at that moment that she had almost no memories of that day. However, the guy was grateful to the girl for supporting him during a difficult period in his life. When he learned that Juliet's family was looking for a groom for her, he made an instant decision. Fairheim doubted whether he should get involved in this, since he did not understand what his soul wanted. However, the guy believed that one day he would be able to truly fall in love with this beautiful girl. At that moment, the lady tightly squeezed Caesar's fingers, which had been gently stroking her head. For a moment it seemed to the Duke that the girl was not asleep and understood his feelings perfectly. But the heroine did this in a dream, and therefore did not hear all the important confessions from her husband. The guy wasn't upset by this, since he hadn't intended to confess anything to Miss in the first place. Caesar only smiled tenderly at the lady who supported him, even in her dreams. Every day, the Duke liked Juliet more and more, and he could do nothing about it. The next morning, the heroine had to make an important decision about 2 tea parties. Both invitations were sent from noble aristocrats whose opinions were important in society. Marquise Jaeger was known to everyone for her kind heart and sharp mind, so she attracted attention. This lady could easily influence the empire's policies, but she did not always do so during tea parties. But the invitation from her turned out to be surprisingly dry and compressed, as if it had been written by someone else. But even the butler knew how deceptive letters could sometimes be. Therefore, the lady decided to first attend another Marchioness's event, all because she hoped to get to know this lady's good circle better. Just a couple of days later, Juliet arrived at the estate fully prepared for the meeting. She did not expect that the other lady would come out to her personally, since usually servants were always sent. But the girl's face did not reflect a drop of surprise, as she had control of herself. It was Sarsina Stemu, and she seemed to the heroine to be a pleasant person who knew how to keep up a conversation. The woman had been eagerly awaiting the meeting with the wife of the well-known Duke of Fairheim all this time. In fact, Juliet didn't come to this tea party for no reason, because she knew about the Marquise's identity. Sarsina was a brilliant artist who painted her pictures under a simple pseudonym, but few people knew that Stemu hid this talent from most of her friends. As a court portraitist, she had good relations with the emperor's family. The girl liked to remain in the shadows, as she did not like public attention. Knowing about the Marquise's connections, the heroine could not refuse the invitation to have tea with her. Only Juliet understood that this lady would never be outside of high society. Sarsina spoke calmly and politely, which gave the lady even more reasons to respect her. It turned out that the well-known Katrina Whedon was also invited to the tea party. Besides her, Betline Perrot, who was famous for her manners and etiquette, was already sitting at the table. This whole motley company greatly pleased the heroine, who tried to get closer to the ladies. But Juliet didn't expect that Stemu would meet her personally, only by his own desire. The girl had never seen aristocrats come out to greet their guests before. However, Sarsina considered such actions to be something ordinary, because she wanted to make friends with the lady. The heroine felt pleased that she wasn't the only one trying to find friends in high society. She hadn't had any high hopes for this meeting, but she ended up being pleasantly surprised. In fact, the girl always fit in easily with the company if she was treated well. And this time was no exception, because while talking, the lady did not notice how quickly time flew by. Each of the ladies turned out to be pleasant conversationalists and were not against Juliet. Therefore, the heroine felt comfortable in society, although she initially thought about not coming. The girl was sincerely glad that for the first time in a long time, she was able to have a good time. But she didn't expect that the aristocrats would want to see her at the next tea party. The ladies automatically accepted Fairheim's wife into their company, which she did not expect. Juliet felt like it took longer to form a strong friendship, but in the end, today, the girl has already acquired such smart and pleasant friends for herself. Towards evening, one of the maids interrupted a long conversation, as it was already late. The heroine planned to return on her own, but she was informed that the Duke had arrived to pick her up. New acquaintances were immediately impressed by the fact that the guy personally came to pick up his wife. Caesar looked stunning in his handsome suit and signature smile. This made Juliet feel even more pleased that Fairheim had come to pick her up personally. The guy smiled happily at the girl, even though he had come for her quite unexpectedly. Only now did the heroine notice that the Duke had been carefully hiding something behind his back all this time. It turned out that Caesar had bought a bouquet of beautiful flowers on the way, which he now presented to the lady. Fairheim said they reminded him of the lady's beautiful locks, which was the reason for the purchase. The heroine did not expect such a surprise, which made her blush in front of all the aristocrats. Seeing the girl's modest reaction, the guy was afraid that she might not like the flowers, but Juliet was delighted with the gift, as she had never received anything like it before. So the Duke made the right choice when he decided to give his lady beautiful flowers. The aristocrats couldn't ignore this, because the couple seemed nice to them. Every woman would like to receive such a surprise from her gentleman, which would be appreciated in society. Only thanks to this did Stemu finally believe in the love between the Fairheim spouses. As soon as Juliet returned to the estate, she asked to put the flowers in a beautiful vase. The maid was happy for her mistress, whose relationship with the Duke was becoming ever closer. But even to her, the heroine did not admit how important it was for her to receive such a gift. But the surprises didn't end there for the girl who wanted to relax. Amber had something to tell the lady, although she doubted for a long time whether it was worth doing. The heroine immediately became wary when the conversation turned to the fact that Caesar was hiding something from her. The maid knew a lot about the boy because she had taken care of him since childhood. So the letters that constantly came from the imperial palace did not escape her notice. Juliet's heart skipped a beat at the sight of them, since there was nothing like this in the plot. She couldn't believe that Berticia was trying to keep in touch with her friend. Amber was certain that Caesar had not responded to any of these letters from his beloved, but she noticed how he read them more than once, drowning in the abyss of despair in his office. The maid hoped that Juliet could help the guy, so she told her everything. Only next to the red-haired girl did he again begin to smile radiantly. Just like in childhood, the maid's trembling hands showed how much she was worried at that moment. All this time, the lady had no idea that her husband was still tormented by his lover's letters, so she wasn't surprised when Amber put the responsibility of saving the Duke on her. The heroine herself would like to help Fairheim, who was supposed to remain alone for the rest of his life. Even the lady was going to leave the poor guy in the future, which only made her more disgusted. Despite this, Miss consoled Amber, promising to definitely talk to the Duke. At that moment, the guy had no idea that his secret had been so easily revealed by the maid. He was busy with work until the evening, so he thought his wife was already asleep. But Juliet waited for the Duke, as she planned to have a serious talk with him that evening. She began the conversation with mundane things, deliberately distracting Caesar's attention. But pretty soon, the boy and girl fell into silence as they ran out of topics for conversation. The lady felt awkward because she did not know where to begin her questioning. Fairheim became much more sensitive to the girl's emotions, so he noticed her nervousness. The Duke had no idea why his wife looked unhappy after a good day, but he did not dare to ask the lady a question first, as he was too shy for that. Suddenly, the heroine confessed that the maid had given her an important task today. Juliet did not hide that they were talking about the Duke's love, which he had not forgotten. All this time, the guy tried to avoid these conversations because they were unpleasant for him, but the heroine did not at all want Caesar to try to become even more secretive about his emotions. It was clear from the Duke that in just a little while, he would close himself off from his beautiful wife for a long time again. But the lady only wanted to respect her partner's boundaries, although she hoped to help him. This delicate formulation of the question pleased Caesar, whose feelings many had forgotten. He was ready to open his whole soul to the girl, who fell in love with him more and more each time. Therefore, Fairheim had no hesitation in allowing the lady to participate in any aspect of his life. The girl was glad that this time the guy did not close himself off from her, as before. Now that the relationship was established, the heroine could move on to the main part of the question. She took out those very letters from Bertici, wanting to know what Fairheim himself thought about them. In response, Caesar honestly admitted that it still hurt him to receive news from his beloved. But he didn't want to answer them, so as not to fall even deeper into the abyss of despair and pain. This answer satisfied the girl, since she did not want to do anything without the Duke's permission. From that moment on, the heroine decided to deal with all of her husband's problems step by step. In the morning, she suggested that the guy throw out all the things that reminded him of Berticia, but Juliet couldn't even imagine that there would be so many of them in the estate. So they fiddled around until lunch, and even then the Duke kept finding more things. But the heroine did not despair, as she was pleased with the enormous work they had done. Judging by the way the guy began to beam, he really did feel better after cleaning the estate. So Juliet did not regret her attempt to at least slightly ease Fairheim's condition. This time, the Duke brought with him a small lunch basket, which was memorable for him. The guy wasn't ready to throw this thing away, even though it reminded him strongly of his beloved. Juliet read in the novel that the Duke personally cooked for the girl, but she was still surprised. Suddenly, she realized that she even envied Berticia, who had received so much attention before. As if reading his wife's thoughts, the Duke invited her to try his dinner sometime. The lady was delighted with the idea, as she was interested in the taste of Caesar's food. Moreover, the guy, with an embarrassed look on his face, said that they could go on a picnic. Juliet remembered well that their marriage contract had a clause about spending time together. That's why the girl didn't refuse her husband, since she herself had never gone on a picnic together. Literally, the next day, the maids were actively choosing a suitable outfit for their mistress. They were so worried, because the lady had never gone anywhere alone with the Duke before. Juliet thought this outfit was too lush, but she couldn't convince her assistants of anything. The girls tried so hard for the lady that the heroine silently accepted all their care for herself. As a result, Miss herself believed that one needs to be beautifully dressed for any date. The maids achieved a stunning effect, because the mistress herself was delighted with herself. Meanwhile, the Duke lovingly laid out all the sandwiches he had personally made for the snack. The guy specifically asked the chef in advance about his wife's possible preferences. Although he had been ready for a long time, for some reason, the Duke still could not bring himself to visit the girl. Moreover, Caesar stood shamefully frozen in front of the door, feeling an incomprehensible anxiety inside himself. It took some time for Fairheim to overcome all unnecessary emotions. Juliet's appearance struck the Duke at first sight, as it was skillfully created by the maids. At the first moment, the girl's beauty blinded the guy so much that he forgot about all the compliments. The maids were pleased with the effect produced, as they had done a great job. So the heroine beamed as if she were getting married again, although she was just getting ready for a walk. Caesar was so surprised that he could hardly find the right words to describe the lady's outfit. Even when they arrived for the picnic, Fairheim still couldn't take his eyes off his wife, all because the heroine couldn't tear herself away from the Duke's sandwiches, which she really liked. For the first time in a long time, the girl felt truly happy and contented, but she didn't expect that her husband's surprises wouldn't end there, because he had a plan. At that time, a small fair was taking place in the city, which the Duke wanted to go to with his lady. For this purpose, they specially transformed themselves into other people, because otherwise they could be recognized. Caesar had taken all these nuances into account in advance, in case they went to the festival. He even forced Juliet to drink a nasty potion that disguised them well. The entire city was decorated for the festival much better than the girl could have imagined. She was so engrossed in her surroundings that she didn't notice the guy's constant glances at her. So Miss didn't immediately notice that the Duke had temporarily begun calling her by a slightly different name. Caesar did everything to ensure that no commoner would recognize them during the festival. Only this could prolong the aristocrat's quiet stroll, which would attract attention. As usual, the heroine was embarrassed by how abruptly the guy came up with something new for her, but his sad eyes were so beautiful that the lady once again could not refuse her husband. With a smile, Fairheim continued to call Miss Leda now, which disguised her name. The girl remained indignant for some time, and then came up with an excellent plan for revenge. Now it was her turn to shorten Caesar's name, calling him the short and laconic Saz. Only now did the Duke realize how much the miss had felt all this time because of the other name. He was instantly embarrassed, although he was not against such a name for temporary disguise. The heroine fell more and more in love with the guy's smile, although she didn't notice it in herself. And this time, Juliet beamed back with the same joyful smile, genuinely enjoying herself. She didn't regret at all that she had forgotten all her important matters for the sake of this happy walk. After just a couple of minutes, the heroine reached various foods that she really liked. The girl began to regret that such goodies were only given out at the festival. The Duke continued to smile next to the lady, but he gave all his food to her. He was already happy, because the joyful smile never left Juliet's face. The girl did nothing but talk about the wonderful festival they had attended. So the Duke realized that going to the event was the best decision of his life. He was glad that there were still so many places they could go together. Soon the heroine ate so much that she couldn't swallow another tasty piece of food. The girl could not express in words how much she enjoyed the festival. But that wasn't all, because Caesar had already thought up another entertainment for his wife. The heroine had no idea that her husband would be so well prepared for their walk. Unlike him, she thought about improvising as she went along, but was involved in the plan. The girl immediately became interested in another proposal from the guy who made her happy. At that very moment, the heroine heard a beautiful song coming from the city center. The whole point was that at every festival, there was always time set aside for beautiful dancing. Caesar hoped that the aristocrat would not refuse him just one dance at the festival. Juliet was amazed at how handsome and happy the Duke looked now, but she had never danced before, so she was afraid that she might ruin the whole dance. No matter how much the lady wanted to take part in the dance, her fears were too great. Surprisingly, Caesar quickly calmed the girl down, convincing her that he could lead perfectly. So Juliet agreed to another adventure that she would never have tried before. The whole world at that moment seemed to cease to exist for the lady who saw only the guy. He led her in the dance so skillfully that the heroine quickly forgot about her awkward movements. The boy and girl completely surrendered to the emotions that overwhelmed them while listening to the music. Furheim was pleased with Mrs. Skills, although she said she couldn't dance. But the heroine attributed everything to the Duke's excellent abilities, who led them brilliantly. In fact, Caesar was also worried that he might seem clumsy to his wife. When the guy confessed this to the girl, these words only brought a smile to her face. She completely shared all the guy's feelings, without thinking that their communication was temporary. Juliet had time to realize what an ideal husband Caesar was, who was constantly trying. The guy didn't expect that the reward for all his actions would be such a pleasant compliment. He instantly became embarrassed and said a few beautiful words in response to thank the lady. At that very moment, water from a fountain that was spewing periodically accidentally fell on them. Only now did the Furheim couple understand why no one else came near this place. But instead of getting angry, they just laughed cheerfully, since nothing could spoil their mood. With each passing moment, the lady liked this date more and more because of the emotions she received. She had never seen Caesar so happy about a simple walk before. But at that moment, the Duke addressed the miss by her real name, which alarmed the girl. It took her a moment to realize that their camouflage was no longer effective due to the splash of cold water. Juliet quickly gave in to panic because she didn't want the commoners to notice her. But Caesar liked the fact that now most of the newspapers would write about them. Only the heroine did not share the guy's joy that their date was no longer a secret. As Furheim predicted, by the evening, all the newspapers were writing about the couple being on a date. The disguised aristocrats quickly attracted public attention with their behavior. Of course, Prince Camilio carefully studied all the news about his successful empire, so the guy was angry that the journalists couldn't come up with better news. His wife did not react to the prince's words in any way, as she was too thoughtful. Berticia became increasingly worried that Caesar was getting closer to Juliet, and not to her. At the very beginning of the wedding, the girl asked Camilio to return their childhood friend to her. The heir did not forget this request, although such a wish from his beloved seemed strange to him. The guy himself was not worried about his friend, since he married a decent girl. He was much more worried about the condition of his wife, who seemed gloomy from the good news. In fact, Berticia didn't like the fact that Caesar was gradually becoming happy, but she couldn't admit this to her husband, so she gave him fake smiles. The lady skillfully manipulated her husband, always achieving what she really wanted. And now, the girl pressed herself against the guy in the hope that he would forget about all her oddities. Although in reality, Berticia could hardly control herself because of the rage inside. A couple of days later, the heroine arrived for the second tea party, which was announced in the letter. The servants of the Marquise Jaeger immediately met the guest, politely greeting her at the carriage. Juliet felt like she was mentally prepared to meet a famous lady in society, but even her assistants were stressing Furheim out with their incredible sullenness and silence. The thought quickly crept into the lady's head that there was clearly something wrong with this place, but the heroine didn't have time to think about it, because it was time to join the tea party, while the lady could not shake the feeling that she was walking towards a terrible place. However, Juliet had long ago learned to keep her face, so she didn't show her emotions to anyone. Even though her appearance caused a sensation, Miss remained calm. She easily managed to ignore the rumors about her that quickly spread among the aristocrats. But the girl had no idea that an unpleasant surprise would await her in this place. The whole point was that Berticia personally attended the tea party in order to meet Juliet. The wife of Duke Furheim was not prepared for the attention that the Empress showed her. However, the heroine quickly collected her thoughts and greeted the lady properly. She couldn't take her eyes off the girl, who was so beautiful that she smiled sweetly at her. Now, Juliet realized why Caesar had been in love with the charming Berticia for so long. The Empress immediately admitted that she had come to the tea party only to meet Furheim. These words greatly alarmed the heroine, who remembered that this lady ignored Caesar. So the lady became uncomfortable with the close attention that the emperor's wife was paying to her. Berticia played the role of a polite lady perfectly, without revealing her true emotions. So, after a moment, it was the heroine who felt guilty for not getting to know the lady. This unexpected meeting made Juliet forget about all her original plans. That's why the girl didn't immediately remember that she hadn't even said hello to the hostess of the tea party. The Marquise Jaeger had enough delicacy and restraint not to remind anyone of this, but the woman's eyes were fixed on the guest, who had not shown her due respect. This time, Juliet was lucky and quickly corrected the situation with her pleasant compliments. It turned out that the Marquise had been watching the Duke of Fairheim's wife for a reason all this time. The heroine quickly guessed that the woman knew about her visit to Stimu. However, Jaeger did not say a word to the lady about the fact that she had previously visited her main rival. So the heroine quickly came to the conclusion that in fact, she should have been afraid of the Empress. Berticia behaved politely, showing with her whole appearance that she wanted to win the trust of all people. But suddenly, she noticed that she and Juliet were complete opposites of each other. Everything about the girls,